So joining me up on stage is we've got a transformation case study from Catherine Dineley from Lloyds Banking Group. Catherine, how are you?
I'm very well, Tim. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. And where in the world do we find you today?
Well, I'm sat in a very sunny Lytham St Anne's. I've borrowed my son's bedroom while he's at school because the backdrop's far nicer than my chaotic office. So I thought this looked far more pristine, which is amazing for an 11-year-old boy, than the mess that is my office right now.
I am very, very impressed, and I used to live in St Anne's on Sea, so it's so excellent place to be. I know.
Yes, it's a beautiful, beautiful day. So I look forward to getting out on the beach later this evening to watch the sunset. Absolutely,
good on you. Enjoy it. So enjoy the walk along the prom. Now, so I'm really looking forward to this session because we're going to talk about transformation, business change, and sort of customer centricity as to how the banking group has really focused on its transformation. Would you explain your role within the group, please?
Yes, so my role is head of group culture. I sit within our people function, people and property function. And so, the work that we do is very much at a group-wide level, but obviously working really closely with all the different divisions. So we've a really small team, but with a huge impact.
And you might have noticed, in previous sessions, I quite often ask, what experiments, what tests have different case studies. How did you test it out, right? Because no one just goes, oh, we're going to engage with everybody immediately. And quite often I also ask, what test or experiment would you leave with our delegates to go and play with? And this is at the heart of your whole approach, isn't it? You love experimentation.
We love experimenting, that's right. Yes, we do. Behavioural experimenting, to be very specific.
So take us into the work. So because your program didn't just deliver digital business change, but as you say, lasting behavioural change. So tell us more. How did you achieve that?
So, behavioural experiments, it really is about individuals and teams intentionally, and I use that word, intentionally using our group behaviours to tackle everyday challenges through a series of small experiments. It's a pretty simple idea, but the idea being that our colleagues would spend time thinking about the behaviours which would speed up the adoption of the right behaviours across the group, and they would then embed them into their everyday working life, supporting our purpose of helping Britain prosper and our strategic ambitions. So, our focus was on really making it practical for the behaviours to come to life and to create new habits through this behavioural experiment approach. And actually, it's creating lasting change. Colleagues simply experiment using behaviours to solve everyday challenges, and they complete them in sprints over about a 6-week period, and in doing so it forms a habit.
Through the pandemic, how has this been utilised across the team? How has this approach helped to shape your response to it within the organisation?
So significantly, we've heard within the behavioural experiments work that we do, we've heard from so many colleagues how they've taken the opportunity, whether that's time or situation, to really put into practice the concept of behavioural experiments. They've taken a challenge, whether that's specifically related to their work in the current environment, if that's related to some development opportunities, and they've used behavioural experiments to really help them. I was talking to one of our branch managers very recently who was saying that they took the opportunity to do some additional development around serving customers with autism, and actually to take that extra training, training that they've done before, but they wanted to do more, they wanted to be able to help more, and actually applied this lens of behavioural experimentation to that. So it's vast how it's being used right now, and I think because we had it, it's really helped this sort of concept that actually we need to continue to experiment. Nobody knew what was happening within 2 hours, let alone the following day. So experimentation has been a massively helpful mindset shift to say it's okay, we're all facing these challenges and we need to continue to work with that.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? Because all of us, we know in terms of our own neuroscience that we establish rhythms and routines, and it helps us to navigate our day, and to unpick some of those and to be more mindful as to why we're doing things a certain way enables us to be then choiceful as to what intent are we then serving. Now, for very established long-serving leaders, this isn't the easiest piece of change to embed. So how did you work with those leaders to get them to unpick their established ways of working and then bring to mind that the need for experimentation for themselves and for their teams?
Yeah, so I mean, we were really lucky from the start in that our CEO sponsored the work. You know, we had a big hunch that really using the behaviours in a very practical way was the right thing to do. So this drove, you know, my team and I to really increase the engagement that we did with senior leadership. You know, we've done engagement with senior leadership teams with across the divisions. We've done engagement with the very senior leadership group, sort of the 200 population, focusing really on listening and bureaucracy. And we've actually created a version of this, which is for leaders. So one of our very, very senior leaders has really led from the front, and actually at the very start of lockdown, put in place a behavioural experiment, which was actually, let's block 1 hour out in the entire division's diary. And that was a no meeting. And, you know, if that meant that it sort of shifted a little bit, but actually said no meetings, and I want you to take a break. Many leaders from across the group have found different ways of using it to change their own working habits and practices, and actually some of the routines and rituals that they also have.
Catherine, the line's being a bit unhelpful. I think what I'm going to ask is if you could just stop sharing your video, and we'll just see if then the audio quality just holds together for this final final piece. And just because I just had one final question, which is, you know, as we've heard consistently all the way through, there's this change between the employee experience and how it then immediately leads through to the consumer experience, the patient experience in the previous case study. And how have you found that? How have you found that within the group?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, actually. So I think there's a couple of things to say that, you know, as part of the strategic period that we're in, you know, one of the big commitments was our investment in our people, and behavioural experiments was, you know, in terms of the training that we offered, was a part of that. I think what we've done with behavioural experiments from that colleague engagement and colleague experience is that we've created something that's actually a bit different. It's not really very corporate, or certainly not very, you know, banking, you know, or financial services. So the brand alone is different. Some people said it's almost a little bit quirky, and that's brought energy, and the brand's really signaled a new type of thinking, which has reinforced, you know, where we want our culture to move to. So I think that's engaged colleagues almost instantly as well. And, you know, in the first year of doing and running behavioural experiments, we saw a significant increase in employee engagement, along with confidence, trust, strategy, you know, using the colleague engagement survey, you know, which in a way was a bit of an unintended outcome, because for us, this was about really thinking about how do we codify the behaviours and form new habits. And so when we asked colleagues in the annual survey if they were involved in BE, we were able to then sort of do a demographic look at, you know, their engagement scores. And what we found was that colleagues who are involved in behavioural experiments are 7 points more engaged than the rest, you know, which is actually a really significant, striking number. So I think that's from the colleague perspective. The other thing is we never turned it into a task. What we did, we wanted to create a movement. We wanted to create a sense of belonging. So, you know, we often turn the phrase that we would go where the love is. And we never said we want X amount of champions from your division. What we've created is a real natural movement. So I think that's the colleague experience. I think as that then extends out into sort of, you know, our customers as well, a significant number of experiments are focused on customers. So it's not just about transforming our colleagues' experience, but also the customer one. You know, there's examples that I could give you dozens and dozens where experiments in branches have explored customer wait times, digital upskilling, education, and they've all led to improvement in customer satisfaction. But one particular standout example is one that we call All Aboard. And a colleague in one of our telephony centres had a challenge that, you know, where customer demand was increased at the end of the day, actually there was some sort of dipping in service times. So, you know, what they really wanted to do was to think about how they could engage all 500 staff in this particular telephony centre to be active at the end of the day when, you know, 6 o'clock comes and you've got to go and pick the kids up from school club or get the bus home or the train or whatever it may be. And actually they put in place this experiment called All Aboard, where at 5:45 all team leaders would put their headsets on, set themselves to available and shout All Aboard, and all colleagues would do that themselves. What happened with that was that it created an environment where everybody was working together. It felt fair, it was equitable, it wasn't the same people staying on the lines for that extra time. But actually customer queries were dealt with 400 seconds quicker. So there's, you know, a fantastic outcome. Forced overtime per colleague was halved, meaning obviously reduced sort of business costs. Colleagues agreed that they felt it was fairer. They shared the workload. You know, colleagues shared the positive impact it was having on their work-life balance. But actually being able to serve customers in such a collaborative and joint and fair way, you know, was also a massive, massive thing. So some of our experiments might deal with one branch. Some might deal with a telephony centre of 500. But what we do is that we take the learnings from each of them and they get scaled up and scaled out where they can.
Just wonderful. Catherine, pop your video back on. That works really well, actually. Just by dealing with the bandwidth, we were able to hear every word and it was gold. Absolutely gold. Thank you so much for sharing that case study with us. Just, you know, wonderful. Thank you to your son for the loan of his room, and and thank you from all of the delegates for sharing the case study. Huge amount of insight. And I loved that example of experimentation and the way that you've really helped us to understand in the different environments that you operate in, be it a branch or be it a call center, different levels of leadership, how you've really sought to and successfully change the culture, change those working rituals that we all fall into, and really made a difference. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.